Is there a way to find out what assets are truly specific and very, very important for a business? Or is there really not a way to do that? Luckily there is, and it's called operating versus non-operating assets. So there are certain types of assets, just like there's current versus long-term and intangible versus tangible. Certain type of assets are called operating assets, and certain type of assets are called non-operating assets. Now, what's classified as operating versus non-operating depends on the business. You see, to become an operating asset, you have to be very, very important for the day-to-day operations of the business. To be non-operating, you don't really have to be that important, you're just kind of along there for the ride. So let's use an example of a camera manufacturer. So let's say that you're Canon. So Canon's operating assets would be things like a machine that they use to make the lenses and make the cameras, the buildings, to house their corporate environments, their headquarters, all that kind of good stuff. The shipping that they use, all the trucks that they use to ship their cameras all over the place. Things like that they have to use to go from, okay, we have a whole bunch of camera parts into a sold camera. Everything in between those two is operating assets. What's maybe not operating assets is, say that Canon has a third-party investment in Nikon, for example. That's not really necessary for them to sell a camera, is it? So that asset of that investment is not going to be an operating investment and not be an operating asset. Other non-operating assets for Canon would be something like spare land. So say that they have their manufacturers and their buildings on one piece of land, and they have some land a little bit farther away that they're not really using. If they're not using it for the day-to-day operations, then that spare piece of land goes into the non-operating area. The same kind of goes with spare equipment. So there is a certain amount of spare equipment you should have as a manufacturer in general. Make sure if your machine breaks, it doesn't take you years to fix it and things like that. But if you have tons and tons of extra machines, some of that machines are probably not necessary for your day-to-day operations, and they don't need to be classified as operating assets. The same thing, usually for a manufacturer, financial instruments would not be an operating asset. So things like loans that you give out, investments that you have in other companies, stuff like that. However, if you were an investment company, so say I'm now Vanguard and I have a whole bunch of camera equipment, the camera equipment is not necessary for me to do my day-to-day business as a financial management company. So that would now become non-operating, and all those financial instruments like the loans and investments I have, that actually becomes operating assets. So that's what kind of makes operating versus non-operating tricky. You see, you have to be able to understand the business well enough to figure out what's truly important to this business, from going from there is no product to the finished product is in my consumer's hand. If an asset's used throughout that process, then it's an operating asset. If it is not used, then it's a spare part, it's a spare piece of land, it's just another investment on the side. That kind of thing is something that is non-operating in general. So, very quick recap. Operating assets are important to the day-to-day operations of a business. Non-operating assets are things that are maybe nice to have, but not necessarily critical.